Hello and welcome to the Thinking Read podcast. I am your host, Tom Vieira. And so, why do we need another philosophy podcast? That's probably the first question that I should be talking about. I hope to give you some idea of my take on this and why I've decided to start this podcast. But first, before I get into any of that, thank you so much for being here. And if what you find here is encouraging, helpful, pass it along. Tell a friend. Send a link. So, I am a philosophy guy. I will admit that right up front. I'm not gonna conceal that. I have a doctorate in philosophy, and I say that with some real hesitation because philosophy nowadays is most often, especially in the academic world, it's sort of thought of as this unique hobby or maybe a technical discipline of some kind, like it's for the experts and it has its own special language. And so it's very esoteric that way. It's part of the professionalization of philosophy. And so let maybe the very first thing I do in this podcast is sort of, I guess, to, I don't know, announce my rebellion against that idea. I think it's a deeply problematic way of thinking about philosophy. I think it removes philosophy from the human, and that's troubling. So, philosophy, insofar as we're really trying to think about life, we're trying to think about, quote, the big questions, right? And what's interesting to me is that the philosophers that are the most interesting to read, um, the most worth reading, are the philosophers that really take the human essence of philosophy very, very seriously. Sort of I mean, when we ask the question, what is life really about? Or what am I as a human being? Um, those types of questions. For which human being is that not relevant? Okay, and so I see this podcast as a little bit of an act of rebellion against the world of academia and the way it has rendered philosophy. And so what I want to do in this podcast is basically meet some really interesting thinkers, people that I think are the most interesting, the most important thinkers that have come along in history. And so it's going to work sort of as a series of series. Is that right? We'll do a series on Blaise Pascal. He's the first philosopher that I really want to explore. His book is called The Pensée, which just means thoughts in French. We'll talk about his fascinating life and this fascinating book, and then we'll go on to another philosopher and then another one, and so it'll kind of be each philosopher will do a series on that philosopher, a series of episodes, and for each one, I'll want to do something like a teaser episode, just to kind of, like an appetizer, right? Just to get our interest going and invite you to go out and get the book. That's something different about this podcast, I think. That if at all possible, I'd love for you to read along. I don't really want this to be a podcast version of Cliff Notes or something, right? Like you're just going to rely on me to tell you what Pascal said or thought. Um, and the philosophers in the works that I want to look at, um, again, I'm curating this. It's very biased, right? You're relying on me to pick the philosophers and to pick the books, but I really do want to choose what I think are the most interesting philosophical works, the most important ones, and some of the ones that are the most readable. manageable. The Pensée as a great example of this. Um, it's really not a systematic book of philosophy. It's a collection of aphorisms, sayings, pithy statements of wisdom, and so on, and so Pascal is one of the most quotable philosophers ever to have lived. If you have ever heard the quote that the heart has reasons that reason can't understand or doesn't know, right? That's right from Pascal. He is chock full of quotable passages like that. So he just super interesting, super readable, right? You can just read a couple pages here, a couple pages there, and really find a lot of value in doing that. So I'll be inviting you to read along with me and to interact with me as as much as that is possible. I'll be uploading into YouTube, and so there's comments there where there can be some interaction. And my email address is the Thinking Read podcast at gmail.com. Reach out that way. And I'd love to get your feedback, your questions, that sort of thing. And if this is successful and we're rolling along and it seems to be some interest and desire for this, then consider supporting me at some point. So, speaking of Blaise Pascal, I'm going to read to you one of his most well-known aphorisms. Um, and then we're going to think on this for a few minutes. Man is only a reed, the weakest in nature, but he is a thinking reed. There is no need for the whole universe to take up arms to crush him. A vapor, a drop of water, is enough to kill him. But even if the universe were to crush him, man would still be nobler than his slayer, because he knows that he is dying and the advantage of the universe has over him. The universe knows none of this. Thus, all our dignity consists in thought. It is on thought that we must depend for our recovery, not on space and time, which we could never fill. Let us then strive to think well. That is the basic principle of morality. Well, now you know where I got the name of the podcast from. What a passage, right? Um, so what I want to do is talk a little bit about this idea that man is a thinking reed, and then connect it to, just very briefly, there'll be another episode where I'll go more in depth on Pascal's life. Very interesting life, but very briefly I'll connect it to his life as well, because Pascal really is in his own way uh, one of the best examples of what he's talking about here. This is man as a paradox. When I say man, of course, this is gender neutral. And so more out of habit than any kind of intentional point I'm trying to make there. The human being is an oddity. And he even uses the word paradox elsewhere in another brilliant passage, which I'll get to in just a minute or two. So what's the paradox here? Man is reed-like and we might say godlike. Reed-like in man's vulnerability. Anything could kill us at any moment. Really is a remarkable thing to see um, the extent to which human beings have to go to just protect ourselves from the elements. It's late January. I live in Tennessee, and and so we don't really have hard winters here, but a bad ice storm just passed through, and we're kind of coming out of that now. The worst one since 1994. Power was out for a number of days, and many people are huddled around space heaters run by generators. They even had that. Um, in our uh, we have we have a small farm here, and we have a wood stove, and we had that stove going nonstop, full heat, for number of days in a row, and it's still quite cold outside. And how susceptible we are to that is remarkable, especially when I look outside and I see our farm animals, Great Pyrenees, dogs and cows, and even these chickens and geese. They're doing just okay, right? They're doing just fine. They there's some shelter, I suppose, right? Um, we're bundled up, right? We have to go to great extents just to protect ourselves, and just from the elements. Think about how vulnerable we are. He says a drop of water could kill us. And a small virus enters in and down we go. Right? These sorts of things. That's a fascinating reality given just this sort of freakish nature of man. Here he is, right? He's super vulnerable to to the environment. Circumstantial variables, let's call them. And yet on the other hand, the same creature can contemplate the heavens. The same creature can ask, "What am I?" The same creature can contemplate time, can think about the way in which the past, anticipating the future, can all be brought together to make decisions about the present. We can contemplate eternity. We can think about, that's sort of the invitation of religion, right? To think about the eternal fate of the human being. Where do I go after I die? I'm not aware of empirical evidence that shows animals make that kind of a consideration, right? Um, how ought I to live my life? Is there such a thing as ought? Is everything just sort of determined? We have those kinds of questions. We wonder about those kinds of things, right? Should I take up prayer or meditation? Why be benevolent? Why be kind? These sorts of things we wonder about. Um, that's a very odd sort of creature, Pascal says. Um, so what I find so fascinating about this, I could kind of go to other places. I will in just a moment, where he takes up the same sort of idea, the oddity of the human being. But what I find so fascinating about this, at least partially, is the way in which Pascal's own life bears this out. Pascal was a really sickly guy. He died at the age of 39. He accomplished a remarkable amount by that age. But he was a sickly man. He famously said that there was hardly a day where he didn't know pain. I believe the going predominant theories that he died of stomach cancer, something like that, severe GI issues, whatever those were. Just was not well for long stretches of time. Periods where he just had to be on fluids. Uh, no solid food at all. I mean, just he understood suffering and fragility. And so when he says that we are fragile, we're like reeds, that anything could kill us, he knew what that meant. And yet, on the other hand, the capacity for thought, for creativity, for understanding, um, it's hard to find somebody that demonstrates that better than Pascal. This is one of the great geniuses of the world, a polymath. He was good at just about anything he did. He basically invented the kind of prototype calculator, invented probability theory, did really important scientific experiments. I mean, he even developed the very first public transportation system in the world. It was in Paris, and he didn't do it just, simply to make a name for himself or something like that. He had a real heart for the poor. He saw the horse and carriage transportation um, means that were available only to the wealthy, and had an idea, got investors, and developed a way in which there would be, horse and carriages on routes that stop every now and then, right? And for a small amount, you could pay and get on and travel to a different part of Paris. And right, I mean, that's that's the kind of guy we're dealing with here. Just a fascinating man in terms of his intellectual abilities, and his entrepreneurial abilities even. Let me read you that passage that it's just absolutely one of my favorites. So this is from um, again from Pensée, from his book called Pensée, and it's in the Penguin Classics version. It's Pensée 131. If you join me for um, this series on Pascal, I'll get more into the Pensée as a work, and why it's a little bit tricky to find the passages. So 434 is the other number for this Pensée that's been given. Here's what he wrote. What sort of freak, then, is man? How novel, how monstrous, how chaotic, how paradoxical, how prodigious, judge of all things, feeble earthworm, repository of truth, sink of doubt and error, glory and refuse of the universe. Who will unravel such a tangle? This is certainly beyond dogmatism and skepticism, beyond all human philosophy. Man transcends man. What a great quote. There's a couple of things here that really stand out. Again, the paradoxical nature of the human being, but that statement itself is a clue to another aspect of Pascal's thought, and that's the limitations of reason. That reason can only go so far in understanding what a human being is. I think this is really important. Pascal has been thought of as really a very profound modern thinker. Now, he's in the early modern period. He lived in the 1600s. But he anticipates a number of the most central issues that we wrestle with in our own time. And I think in the wake of thinkers like Marx and Darwin, um, Freud, and others, where their understanding of human nature tends to be quite reductionistic, right? We can take the human being and sort of understand him in terms of a single principle, whether that's economics, in Marx's case, biology and the need to survive in Darwin's case, or sexuality in Freud's case, right? There's sort of this magic bullet, this master key that kind of unlocks all the doors and opens up to us all of the aspects of the human being. And Pascal says no such key exists. This is beyond philosophy. And that's a really, really important insight for him. It's a really important clue as to how we ought to understand really the whole universe. So we're going to start here with this idea of the strangeness of man and what this means for Pascal. In the next episode, I'm going to get into the life of Pascal, the time in which he lived. It's one of the most interesting periods in all of history. And then after that, there will be 1, 2, 3 episodes, not sure, on his work, the Pensée in particular. We're going to take that up and look more closely at different aspects of it. And so I hope you will join me as we explore the thinking of Pascal. And then after Pascal, we'll move on to another thinker and proceed in a similar manner. Thanks so much for being a part of this, for listening in. Until next time, our question is to think or not to think. I hope you join me. Bye for now.